Welcome, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to another show. It's your host, Danny Haifong. And as you can see, I am joined by Scott Ritter, former UN weapons inspector and U.S. Marine Corps intelligence officer, now geopolitical commentator, analyst, journalist. Lots to get to. Scott, how are you doing today? How are you this evening?
I'm doing great. Thanks. Yourself?
I am doing all right. Thank you. So let's get right to it then, Scott. So maybe we can begin earlier today. It is February 13th as we are speaking. There was a report from Reuters from numerous so-called Russian sources that informed Reuters that Vladimir Putin indeed has been using various channels over the course of the last year to initiate some kind of diplomatic resolution to engage with the United States, supposedly around some kind of settlement to this conflict. Now, this comes at a very curious time after Vladimir Putin was on Tucker Carlson's program. He was interviewed in Moscow, where he, to the viewership of over 100 plus million people, he said to Tucker Carlson that indeed it's the United States that has all of the opportunities to end the conflict, and that he has not spoken personally to Joe Biden throughout the course of this conflict, and that while channels are open, he didn't make any indication of such a proposal. So, Scott, what do you make of these reports, and what can you tell us about these reports given this context of the Putin Tucker Carlson interview?
Well, I mean, first of all, we have to be leery of anything we read in the media nowadays. Understand that there is a concerted effort underway in the West, in the United States and Europe, um, to try and belittle the Tucker Carlson Vladimir Putin interview, to demean the Russian president in an effort to show him as being less than straightforward, forthright, etc. So, after an interview where he pretty much made it clear that there's only one channel open right now, and that's the intelligence channel, and they're talking about prisoner swaps, but little else. To suddenly have the media come out and say, no, 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 Vladimir Putin is making efforts. First of all, what does that mean? Vladimir Putin is making efforts. That means that the side that's winning the war, is the side looking for an off ramp. It just makes no sense. Vladimir Putin and his top diplomats have said for some time now that they're open to negotiated settlement, but the negotiations have to be realistic. There isn't a realistic position in the West. Ukraine's position is absurd. I mean, return to the 1991 borders. I mean, you and whose army? Because it's not the Ukrainian army. That's being destroyed. NATO isn't going to intervene. They don't have anything to intervene with. The fact is, the West is the one that is desperate for a negotiated solution, but they can't come up with a formula because Ukraine won't let them come up with a formula. It's difficult, almost impossible for the West to consider a negotiation with Russia without Ukraine being on board, because otherwise, what are you negotiating? So I don't put any faith in these reports. They make no sense logically. And the one thing anybody who's been following Russia for some period of time knows that the Russians are inherently logical. They don't behave in an illogical fashion, and they are protective of their president, meaning that they aren't going to be doing things that undermine the legitimacy and credibility of Vladimir Putin. When he speaks, his words carry weight, and it's impossible to consider that the president would go on an interview that everybody knew was going to be, it was going to break the internet. Everybody knew it was going to be one of the most widely watched events in modern media history. To go on there and commit to something that would be debunked, days afterwards. No, this is, I believe, wishful thinking on the part of people in the West who um, either are desperate for an off ramp because they recognize what's happening to the Ukrainian military. It's collapsing as we speak. I mean, it's falling apart. Um, they are literally out of ammunition. They're out of men. They're out of options. And so, what they're trying to do is project a desired outcome, but Russia's not playing ball right now. Will Russia seek a negotiated? So all wars end in negotiation, one way or another. World War II ended when the Japanese negotiated their unconditional surrender on board the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay in September of 1945. I believe that this conflict will end when Ukraine negotiates its unconditional surrender, maybe in Kiev, maybe in Lvov, maybe somewhere else. But the idea that Russia's reaching out looking for a negotiated settlement is just patently absurd.
Yeah, and the reports from Reuters talk about how it's the United States that rejected such a ceasefire deal, and they cite that, or they don't even indicate. There's no indication of why, but there's a reference to Vladimir Putin was unwilling to cede territory. So I wonder if you can make sense of this because why would Vladimir Putin pick up the phone or speak through intermediaries? They mentioned maybe Arab leaders, leaders from the Middle East, delegates, some kind of intermediary from these allied countries, so-called neutral countries. Why would he speak in any form about ceding territory? To me, that seems
No,
very
it's
strange, especially after this interview.
well, first of all, Russia is a nation that's governed by the rule of law. Now, people can complain about the imperfect manner in which Russia implements the rule of law. That's open for discussion. But understand this: the Russian Constitution is quite clear about how Russian territory is treated, and the Russia has absorbed 5 new territories since 2014, Crimea in 2014. And then, as a result of 4 referenda in September of 2022, they have Kherson, Zaporizhia, the Donetsk People's Republic, and Lugansk People's Republic. This is Russian territory. This is Mother Russia. This is Holy Russia. Um, no Russian president can negotiate this way. It's literally impossible. So the idea that Vladimir Putin's calling up, going, "We're going to give away some territory. We'll make concessions," is absurd. It's wishful thinking. I think what it is that the Russian president, in his interview with Tucker Carlson, made it clear that Russia is willing to negotiate, but that they won't make any concessions on territory, for instance. And I think Reuters may have talked to somebody in the National Security Council who said, well, then it's a non-starter, because unless Russia is willing to, make concessions on territory, because the U.S. has been whispering, we may give them Crimea. Give them, they have it. You're not getting it back. It's Russian forever now. In exchange for what? You want Russia to give up Kherson? Can't. It's part of Russia. You want Russia to give up Zaporizhia? Can't. It's part of Russia. Give up Donetsk? Can't. Lugansk? Can't. Russia can't give anything up. It's like asking Russia to give up Vladivostok, St. Petersburg, Moscow. You can't. It's all Russia, and it's Russian constitutionally. And the Russian president, no matter how powerful you think Vladimir Putin is, he literally cannot go and give up pieces of Russia. So the whole concept here is flawed. But again, I think what you're seeing with Russia is, it's sort of this indifference. Yeah, we're willing to negotiate, but since you're not, we're just going to take it by force, and there's nothing you can do to stop us.
Yeah, and can you speak to, because this interview with Tucker Carlson, we haven't gotten the chance. I covered here on my channel, but we haven't gotten the chance to speak about it. It seems that this piece of information, this has been swirling for quite some time. This idea that Putin is signaling in some form for negotiated settlement, for some kind of peace deal, that he is the one reaching out to his NATO counterparts or US counterparts. But in this interview with Tucker Carlson, Putin was just so clear, and you said Putin broke the internet. The interview broke the internet. The level of sophistication of how Putin laid out Russia's, not just its position in this conflict, but why Russia has behaved the way it has toward NATO and the United States was so clear that it would really take a lot of mental gymnastics to try to validate and verify now these reports coming out. It's almost like two different it's like Jekyll and Hyde. They're two different things
Yeah.
altogether. So could you talk about this interview, your reactions to it, and in particular Vladimir Putin and his articulation of Russia's actual position here and where this conflict has gone and is going and where it's going?
Well, the interesting thing is when Tucker Carlson introduced the interview, he said, "Look, I'm going to show you this interview. When it starts, you're going to, I ask a question, and then the Russian president goes off on, a 20, 30-minute expose, and I thought it was filibustering." Well, I mean, with all due respect, look, Tucker Carlson is not a Russian expert. He admits it. I mean, he makes no bones about it. He's new to the topic. I mean, he's an 8-day wonder. And what I mean by that is he went to Russia for 8 days and suddenly he's been enlightened, which is good. It's a good thing. Anybody who travels to Russia in 8 days will be enlightened, especially Moscow, a huge city that's got wonderful infrastructure, clean, everything works. It's There's no American city that is the equivalent of Moscow. No European city is the equivalent of Moscow. Moscow is unique. St. Petersburg is unique. Tucker didn't go there, but my point is, you know, his job was to bring Vladimir Putin's voice to a billion people, and he succeeded. I mean, and in that, there's no one else in the world that could have done what Tucker Carlson did. So he needs to be applauded. But we need to make sure we understand Tucker Carlson didn't understand hardly anything that Vladimir Putin was telling him, especially the history. Vladimir Putin spent a long time going through the history of the formation of Russia and the concept of Ukraine and why he believes it's an artificial construct. But in doing so, he said some things that a Russian historian or somebody who was, capable of putting into the proper context what Putin was saying, it set off a light bulb. Prior to this interview, Vladimir Putin, made answered a question to somebody, and he basically said that Odessa is a Russian city. Odessa, of course, being the Ukrainian controlled city with a majority Russian population, at least through history, on the Black Sea, the major seaport of Ukraine today. He said it's a Russian city. Um, they feel the same way about Kharkov in the north. They feel the same way about Dnipropetrovsk in the center, Mykolaiv just to the northwest of Odessa. Russian cities. Why am I saying this? Because throughout his historical discussion, class, we'll just call it a class. He was giving us a class in Russian history. He kept talking about the right bank and the left bank of the Dnieper River. And he kept saying things like the right bank, had the history of Austro-Hungarian involvement, nascent Ukrainian nationalism, things of that nature. But the left bank was always Russia. The left bank was always Russia. And he kept going back and forth. The left bank is Russia. He said back then we called it the new territories. Well, what do they call it today? The new territories. And as he kept going through and making this emphasis, it became clear that Vladimir Putin was saying that this conflict doesn't end until all of New Russia is part of Russia. And so all these people saying that Vladimir Putin's calling around saying, I want to give you back territory, you didn't listen to what he was saying. What I was hearing from him is Odessa is a Russian city and will be a Russian city. Dnipropetrovsk, Mykolaiv, Kharkov, these are Russian cities. The left bank of the Dnieper River is New Russia and has always been and will continue to be. And that's what I heard. And I think most students of Russian history, most people who study Vladimir Putin's speeches would agree with me. In fact, I haven't found anybody who disagrees with me yet on this one. Anybody who's knowledgeable about Russia, um, and this puts the whole Reuters, Putin calling up to give away territory thing to bed, because it's impossible. Putin was saying the exact opposite thing during this interview. That 30-minute history lesson was literally. I mean, I will tell you this: if I were in the CIA, and I used to work with the CIA back when they were SOVA, in the Cold War, when they were Soviet analysis, um, the best Russian Soviet analysts in the world, um, they would have gathered around, and they would have had a round table where people were taking it apart, and they would have gone through everything he said, and the conclusion would have been, and they would have written a paper straight to the President of the United States: Vladimir Putin is signaling that he is going to capture 4 new territories before this war ends. That would have been the paper. And the CIA would have put it in front of the president and said, this is sort of what's going to happen. Now, maybe the CIA is doing that today. I don't know. It's been so politicized that, it can't. Maybe the CIA has been given talking points that you can't do anything that promotes a Russian point of view, that your job is actually to promote something. Yeah, we saw that, for instance, with Saddam Hussein and weapons of mass destruction. Nobody in the CIA went around and said, hey, UNSCOM, the United Nations, has been doing this job. They account for 95%. Every word coming out of the Iraqi government is they don't have these weapons. There's no indication that they do have these weapons. Maybe they don't have the weapons. The CIA wasn't even allowed to consider that point. All they could consider was Saddam is hiding weapons, even though there was no evidence that he was doing so. So we know that the CIA could be corrupted by politicization. I imagine that the Russia Mission Center today is corrupted in the same way. They are ordered that you can't do anything that promotes a Russian point of view, even if that's your job, is to be accurate about what the Russian point of view is. You actually have to take the intelligence and shape it so that it supports American policy objectives. So I don't know if they sat down and took that apart, but Tucker should have known this. My one frustration with Tucker is that he was not prepared for this interview. He was not prepared at all. He had the questions he wanted to ask, but to be honest, he didn't even know why he wanted to ask them, because he couldn't ask any effective follow-up questions. He was confused about the history lesson because he didn't take the time to study Russian history and to put it into perspective, to understand what Putin was talking about: left bank, right bank. And you saw this with the totality of the interview, all the way up to the concluding question about Evan Gershkovich, the Wall Street Journal journalist. And Tucker should never have asked that question, because had Tucker done his due diligence, done his homework, he would have known that there is a very good likelihood that Evan is a CIA non-official cover asset. It just and Putin sort of schooled him on it. I mean, if not, why is the CIA in active negotiations with the Russian intelligence service to service, about getting Evan back? If Evan was just a journalist, the CIA would not be engaged in this fashion. This would be the State Department's job. But the CIA is involved. Why? Evan's a CIA asset. And Putin was basically saying that, the services are involved. Well, let the services handle this one, But Tucker was ill prepared. But again, I don't think it was his job to be prepared for this interview. I think it was his job to have the interview, let Putin speak, and let those words be heard by a billion people. And in that, Tucker succeeded.
Yeah, I mean, if even just studying Vladimir Putin's speeches, what he has said about Russia, about Ukraine, about the region, about Russia's history, it's no secret that Vladimir Putin likes to talk about history. So that should have been expected to at least some degree, and perhaps approach differently. So definitely agree
And
on
he
that
also
point.
missed some. It wasn't just about history, though, because you have to combine. I mean, okay, let's say you had a bingo card. Let's say we played Carlson Putin interview bingo card. Who on the bingo card would have said Dostoevsky? Not too many people. But if you know Vladimir Putin, if you've been studying him, if you've been studying Russia, you know that the Russian soul factors into everything Russia does. And Vladimir Putin is a Russian president. So he is concerned about the Russian soul, the Russian soul. He explained more about Russia and the Russian people in this briefing than, again, most people picked up on.
Yeah.
Dostoevsky, the Russian soul. I mean, go read the Brothers Karamazov. Go. How many people in this audience know who the Grand Inquisitor is? Understand the importance of that, the concept of good versus evil, the role of redemption. My God, what a deep presentation Putin provided. He talked about the brain, the two parts coming together. But in the end, his final words were, you cannot separate the Russian soul from the Russian people. I mean, listen to the man. I make fun of it. I mean, I feel like, you've seen Apocalypse Now, and the scene when Martin Sheen shows up in the boat when they finally get to Colonel Kurtz's camp. And who's the actor? Dennis Hopper comes out. He's the journalist, and he's talking about Kurtz. He's like, he's crazy, man. He's brilliant. He's crazy. I mean, that's how I felt after watching the Putin interview. I'm just like,
Yeah.
oh God, I'm all Dennis Hopper here, because holy cow, it burst my brain. The depth of what he was saying. He was speaking on so many different planes, but nobody got it. Nobody got
Right.
it. But the
Yeah.
beauty of it is it's captured for posterity, and people will get it. People will go back and watch this thing over and over and over again and extract knowledge. People are already starting to ask questions. People are already starting to say, why aren't we negotiating with this man? What is the problem here? Tucker embarrassed himself about, I felt at one point in time that you never get out of the boat. I'm sorry, I'm reading your comments. I was told by my wife, never read the comments, but mangoes. But the thing is, I got distracted, but no, Tucker, asked. I thought a couple times Putin was going to just reach out and slap him, like, "Bah,
Yeah.
listen to me, boy." Especially when Tucker, like an idiot, with total. I mean, my God, if you had done your homework, you would have known never to say this. But well, the Nazis were 80 years ago. I mean, that was, dude. I will tell you right now, Tucker, you should have called me up. I would have told you that in May, when I was there for the Victory Day celebration, when I went to all of the museums and I went to all of the memorials. I mean, one of the most touching museums was actually in Sevastopol. There's a fortress there that held out and finally had to surrender, and most of the people in there died. But you're in there, and they have a room, and you go in there, and and then you see the stars, and then you see the faces of the people, and the constellation is talking to you. The constellation are the faces of the 27 million looking down on you, saying, do not forget us. Do not bring shame to our memory. Never forget what we died for. This is ingrained into the soul of every Russian, literally. I mean, Americans often, will roll their eyes. Why? Because hell, we don't celebrate World War II victory anymore. When was the last time we had a national holiday? I mean, if we do celebrate, we're going to bring out the beer, pop the beer, do the barbecue, get drunk, play loud music and all that.
Right.
Victory Day is a solemn day there. These people, they have the damn immortal regiment where, because all the veterans have died now, the veterans used to march, but now, they're all 100 years old.
Yeah.
What they do is millions of Russians come to the street on Victory Day with photographs of their ancestors who fought in the war, not just died, but fought, people who served their nation, and they march the immortal regiment. The memory will never die. The memory will never die. The memory will never die. And Tucker Carlson said, well, it was 80 years ago. Tucker, you shouldn't have said that, man. Putin almost snapped your neck off. I mean, he leaned in there and he said, I think he said, it's an interesting question, but it's a disgusting question, because disgusting, it means you don't know what you're talking about. You just insulted the entire Russian nation. And again, Tucker's job wasn't to go in there and be the PhD. His job was exactly what he accomplished. I mean, again, nobody else in the world at this point in time could have done what Tucker did to bring the attention. I mean, he had the help of Elon Musk and X, but the point is, 300 million The numbers may approach 1 billion by the time this is done. I mean, come on, man. That's unprecedented. And Tucker deserves all the credit in the world. But Putin, throughout this interview, was just looking at him. I mean, look at the body language of Putin. He's just sitting there going, "You didn't
The
prepare at all."
faces, I mean, you could literally take screenshots almost every couple of seconds, and just meme worthy because Putin's face was so. I mean, he's a very animated, charismatic speaker when he is in his element, but at the same time, yeah, there were just many opportunities for him to make a lot of interesting faces given what he was being.
And the
What he
thing
was being.
that I've learned about the Russians in interacting with them, is they're very forgiving of. They don't expect me to be a PhD. All right. I mean, and I'll talk with them, and you can see them going, "You got that about 80% right, Scott. But you got to work on the last 20%. But you tried." That's the important thing. You showed us enough respect to actually try and learn about this. And we respect you for it. We appreciate you for that. We appreciate the effort. You made an effort. That's all they want. They want to be respected. Not to be worshiped, not for us to fall on our knees and pray, but just to say, "Hey, I respect you enough to try and learn your history and to try and put it in a proper perspective." Um, Tucker Carlson was so disrespectful in this interview. Now he'll claim he wasn't, but I'll counter that he was, because you're interviewing the president of Russia. It's sort of like the biggest interview of modern times, and you weren't prepared. You didn't do your homework. You didn't show them the respect. You couldn't put their history in a proper perspective. You couldn't comprehend their history. You couldn't ask appropriate follow-on questions, and you lost control of the interview. The Russian president took control of the interview and basically laid out the message he wanted to give out. But it was your job as the interviewer to extract that from the president, but you didn't. The president took control of it, and he gave you the material, which is good because your job was to get the voice heard, and you succeeded. But I don't claim to be the world's greatest expert on Vladimir Putin, but I can say that I've watched him enough interacting. His body language was just basically saying, you invited me to the party for this,
Yeah.
you didn't do your homework. Is this all you got? I mean, literally, I mean, he was just looking at him like, "No, you told me that this is like, have you ever seen that movie, Heaven Can Wait, Warren Beatty?"
Mhm.
I mean, it's a classic movie, but basically he's a football player who gets hit by a bike, or he's on a bike, gets hit by a car, but the angel pulls his body out too soon and assumes he's dead. But it wasn't his time. He would have survived that, but his body got cremated. So now if they find him a body, and long story short is he wanted to get back and play football. So he he was a billionaire, so he bought the football team, and then he got a tryout. Okay, so he's at the tryout. Now, at the tryout, in order to win, he has to show up and actually be physically fit, know the plays, know the stuff. And he showed up and he did it. I feel like Putin felt like he was the coach of that football team, the Los Angeles Rams, and Tucker Carlson was saying, "Hey, I want to try out. Give me a chance." So he gave him the shot. And Tucker Carlson came there and he was on a pogo stick with a clown face saying, "I'm ready to play NFL quarterback." And Putin's like, "No, you're not. I mean, you told me you wanted this interview. I mean, my God, 3 years you've been asking for this interview, saying you want this interview. We gave you the interview. And this is what you bring to the table? A pogo stick and a clown mask? You didn't bring NFL quality football skills?" I mean, so
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't speak for the Russian president. I don't pretend to, but just his body language alone was just like, "No, man, you didn't do your job."
Yeah, there were certainly some moments of that interview where I felt like Putin was in that situation where you've been invited to a party, but you really haven't wanted to go to any parties that you were invited to by this particular person or group of people. Then you finally go, and you're like, I shouldn't have. I shouldn't have come because especially the moment where he was asked about China. There were a few moments where he's asked about China, where in both instances the insinuation was that either China is not feared by the United States, but the United States fears Russia, or that China is replacing the United States, or the unipolar West, collective West, in the BRICS formation. And in both of those instances, I feel like Putin was definitely in that one where he's just like, this is really the question you're going to ask, because it's not so difficult to understand the China-Russia relationship, even if you know, even all the things that you just mentioned, Scott, notwithstanding the history, understanding Russia. Even if you don't understand any of that, you just do some cursory research and you understand that Russia has a very different viewpoint than that. So to even
Yeah,
ask that
but I
question is
but I also
interesting.
hope that Tucker took the following lesson away, because I saw him in Dubai. I think it was yesterday. He was speaking at Dubai, and he said, I mean, he's what I call an 8-day wonder. I mean, he went to Russia for 8 days, and suddenly he's been awoken, which is good, good. But hey, Tucker, what would happen if you went to China? I mean, you're sitting here, you're such a xenophobe. You hate China. You're trying to pit China against Russia and all this stuff. Negative, negative, negative. Do you think for a moment, Tucker, that if you went to China and gave China 8 days, interviewed Xi Jinping, maybe, do you think your mind would be blown? I mean, high-speed trains, they actually work in China. There's a whole bunch of them. Clean infrastructure. I mean, I just think that Tucker, if he's truly open-minded, his next step should be to go to China. Um, I think he was crudely trying to create a situation where he could pit Russia against China as some sort of
Yeah.
neoconservative fantasy of
Which
splitting
is
Putin and
weird,
Xi
which is
Jinping.
strange, because you're with Vladimir Putin, who is not going to entertain that to any significant degree. But continue.
No, no, I mean that. Well, Putin's like, we don't get to pick our neighbors.
Yeah, it's like,
China's our neighbor, whether you want us to be or not. They're there, and we just happen to be getting along great right now. He talked about trade, balance in trade, because that's one of the big things. I mean, you saw this with and Tucker Carlson. I apologize, Tucker, if you're watching. I don't mean to be picking on you. You did a great job. Could have done better, but you did a great job. But
right.
you know, Joe Biden did the same thing. Listen, you remember when Joe Biden met with Vladimir Putin back in June of 2021 in Geneva in the lead up to this whole special military operation, trying to talk, and then his press conference afterwards. Well, I shouldn't talk, but I'll talk about it anyways. I told Putin, man, you don't want to do this. That China's big, and they're going to take over your economy, and they're going to. You need to come over to us. You need to break apart. And you know, I'm just sitting there going, didn't the CIA brief you on anything, boss? I mean, why would you say something so utterly stupid? I mean, I know by just watching Russian news that Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping actually like each other. They actually attend each other's birthday celebrations. They make pancakes together. They have real conversations, human to human conversations. It's not superficial like the kind of crap you pull on them. And if you think that your little statement there in Geneva was going to suddenly make Vladimir Putin go, "Oh, bang, damn,
Oh
I
yeah.
should have had a V8." You're right. Hey, Lavrov, yeah, terminate everything with China. We ain't doing it now. No, 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 no. I'm going over to America because Joe Biden showed me the light. It's just stupid. It shows a lack of sophistication, a lack of comprehension, a lack of understanding. Um, and no one even considers the fact that let's say you're the Chinese. You're looking at how the West is posturing against Russia, going, if you remove the word Ukraine and put the word Taiwan, that's the same thing they're doing to us. And if we let them get away with it with Russia, they're going to turn around and try to do it with us. So the place to stop the West right now is Ukraine. And China has finally come to the realization. I mean, their new defense minister came out and said, we're with Russia all the way on Ukraine. There's no daylight. We're, because in the past they were like, we like the Russians and everything, but Ukraine, Westphalian principles, we can't, we don't. Not anymore. China went, we're with Russia 100% on Ukraine. 100%. There's no daylight because they recognize, finally, China realizes that what the West tried to do to Russia through Ukraine is exactly what they're trying to do to China through Taiwan. And again, the CIA's job is to know this. The CIA's job is not, Your job as an intelligence officer is never to tell your boss what they want to hear. That's not your job at all. That's what a PR person does, a campaign manager. Job as the intelligence officer is to put the harsh truth on the table. Say, these are the facts. Now you do with them as you wish. You shape policy around the facts, but the facts are the facts. I can't sit here and tell you something that isn't backed up by reality. I'm here to give you reality. And the reality is Russia and China, they're like this, man. They complete each other.
Yeah, that's 100% true. And the interview, as you said, it was a really great opportunity. For all of my criticisms, my criticisms of Tucker Carlson, that he did this at all and that it turned out the way it did was a huge service. So I definitely acknowledge that. But of course, we saw so many examples of how even when you're in the room with someone of the stature of Vladimir Putin, that high level kind of interview, it's hard to shed that American exceptionalist baggage. There was a lot of baggage that was brought in there. And I think the amazing thing was that Vladimir Putin showed just how prepared he is as a leader. While you have Kamala Harris and all of these the spokespeople for the Biden administration having to scream at the top of their lungs that Biden's memory is okay. Biden is okay. Everything is going okay. You don't have to worry about Joe Biden, as he's mistaking the Egyptian president with the Mexican president, and just having one memory lapse after another. Vladimir Putin just was interviewed, and what was supposed to be, I don't think it was that tough of an interview, but at the same time, it is a risk to go to the Western media of any kind, even an independent now like Tucker Carlson, and go there and just give the Russian perspective. It is something that obviously takes a lot of care, and it's a huge decision. And the fact that Putin did that and just hit the ball out of the park without seemingly even trying, I think just shows the vast differences of where Russia is right now and where the United States is. And so anyway, last reactions to maybe this interview.
Well, let me just say this. I don't know how Tucker prepared for this, to be honest. I mean, he hasn't told us how he prepared for it. He is a professional. Tucker may have done this on purpose, may have, done this, to this ill-prepared interview to give Putin the chance to say what Putin wanted to say. Because Tucker's questions were sophomoric. They were simple. But I don't think so. I think Tucker thought that he was prepared. I'll tell you who was prepared: Vladimir Putin. Again, as someone who's been a Putin watcher for 20 plus years, look what Putin did with Angela Merkel. He knew she didn't like dogs. And so Putin comes in all friendly and he brings his dog and has his dog hanging out by her, and she's uncomfortable. He threw her off, but it's a test, because if she's a pro, yeah, the dog's there, she's uncomfortable. But now, by being uncomfortable, Putin gets to test her to see how prepared she is, how she performs under pressure. I mean, the guy wasn't a KGB agent for nothing. I'm not saying that that's how he approaches everything. It's standard practice. If you're a good politician, every politician tests people. They come in, they grab your hand, the grip of the hand, they pull you in to see how you're doing. They'll put you in an uncomfortable situation to see how you respond. It's a test. And you saw Putin, Tucker asked his question. What the first thing Putin did? Took control of the interview by telling a long history lesson. Now, if Tucker was prepared, instead of interrupting and talking about the relevance of this, he would have come in with a question, and Putin would have went, aha, did his homework. Okay, now he's back. Boom. Now now we're boxing. Okay, because he came in, he gave me his jab. I pushed in. I got him in the corner. He comes back with a question. Now we're boxing. Now we're talking. Now I'm going to do this, and Putin would have respected that. But instead, what Putin did is basically said, screw it, Tucker. I'm bringing the dog in the room. You know when he did it. I heard you applied for the CIA, but they didn't take it.
Yes, yeah,
Tucker,
yeah.
I mean, and
Yeah.
right at that point in time,
His
Tucker,
face, stone face. He did not want to touch that.
that was the end of Tucker's controlling the interview, and from that moment on, Putin took charge, which is what Putin did. He realized that the guy couldn't box, so he hit him, and then Putin just went on and gave his answer. He kept going. You got anything else for me? Because at that point in time, Putin got bored. To be honest, Putin's just like, I thought you said we're gonna have a serious conversation. Do you got anything else for me? Anything else you want to ask? I mean, come on, man, do something. So this was Vladimir Putin's interview, not Tucker Carlson's interview. Vladimir Putin took, and that's important because again, what Tucker did is give Vladimir Putin a stage, an international stage. Hundreds of millions of viewers so far, more to come, and people are responding to this interview in a positive way. By the way, Tucker Carlson was getting ovations in Dubai, ovations, and I can guarantee you when he comes back to America, he's going to be getting ovations too. He has scared the living crap, excuse my language, out of the establishment, because the last thing the establishment wanted was for Vladimir Putin's words not only to be heard, but to resonate. And now Americans who are realizing that they've been lied to by the Biden administration, by the Trump administration, by everybody about Russia, they've been lied to, are sitting there going, wait a minute, we need to recalibrate right now. And this recalibration is scaring the crap out of the Democrats and, frankly speaking, the Republicans. I will tell you this, I don't know Mike Johnson, I can't speak for him, but I think that he is sleeping a lot easier today about not bringing, not giving the Ukraine aid bill a chance. He says dead on arrival. Well, why? What gives him the confidence to do that? I think what gives him the confidence to do that is the realization that Biden's got nothing, that Ukraine is a dying issue, that there isn't an overwhelming a number of Americans. Tucker Carlson's interview, I believe, is a liberating factor there, because while Johnson isn't going to, you saw, I forget who the senator was, the guy that was holding up the votes for all of the for all the generals for a while. But he said, based on Tucker Carlson's interview, we see Putin is open to negotiation. So why aren't we negotiating instead of giving $64 billion to continue this war? Why aren't we doing that? People are starting to think. People are starting to ask questions. And that was the brilliance of what Tucker Carlson accomplished here.
Yeah, definitely. And Tucker Carlson's interview, the immense interest in it alone is pressure enough, because it shows just so starkly in an election year. I mean, every year is an election year in the United States, it feels like, but in a key election year, it's obvious that interview, the energy around it, the fact that it's already gotten 100, 150, however many plus million views ongoing, that's pressure enough to demonstrate people in the United States and the collective West, but if we're just talking about the United States, aren't that interested in the ongoing quagmire the United States wants to place it and continues to place itself in Ukraine. But yet they're very interested when given the opportunity to hear the other side, which shows that maybe there's more interest in the other side than is allowed to be generated. And that alone, for me, feels like political pressure there that the political class understands. Maybe the neocons don't understand this, but certainly those who are using, whether they're genuine or not. I don't always think that Republicans are genuine about the Ukraine question, but they understand that to align with their counterparts on Ukraine at this juncture with regard to funding is political suicide. So that's enough to align and go, and it runs parallel to that interest in Putin's interview. Any final thoughts on that before we move on?
No, I agree with you. I think we've beat this horse enough.
All right, so Scott, there's also there's a few things I wanted to also get to. Perhaps we can move on to some of the nuts and bolts of what's happening in Ukraine. So you mentioned the funding bill, that appears dead on arrival in the House, but there's all sorts of hoopla, of course, around the passage in the Senate of this major 60 plus $billion Ukraine funding bill, which I think is what 100 plus billion for the 3 wars that the United States finds itself in Asia, Gaza, and Ukraine. But you mentioned the huge issues that Ukraine is experiencing on the battlefield. All eyes right now are on Avdiivka. It appears that the Western mainstream media is conceding heavily that Avdiivka is very close to a Bakhmut type situation of going in Russia's favor, that the situation for Ukraine is terrible. And there's also the political issue, and to comment on this, Zelensky is gone. Valery Zelensky, he's gone. Now you have the butcher of Bakhmut, Alexander Syrskyi. And as this literal figure who's responsible in Bakhmut for sacrificing many, many Ukrainian soldiers to the point where the Politico, this rag of the Western mainstream media, is reporting that Ukrainian soldiers are telling them they are FUCKED because of this guy coming in. He is now saying that Ukraine is changing its strategy. Breaking news. It is now only interested in holding the line. So, Scott, help us make sense of this situation, these contending but interrelated developments.
Well, first of all, let's talk about Zelensky. He's a popular general, popular amongst the Ukrainian forces and popular amongst the West. He was the face of Ukraine at the Ramstein contact group in Germany, where Ukraine would meet with NATO, European allies, and convince them to basically turn over $150+ billion worth of assistance, military assistance, equipment, training, money, etc. He was very good at what he did. He wasn't the battlefield commander. The battlefield commander was the commander of the ground forces. That was Syrskyi. So Zelensky's job was to create the conditions for a Ukrainian victory, to give Syrskyi the equipment, the manpower, etc., that he needed to prevail on the battlefield. Syrskyi has a mixed record. In 2014, he was the commander of the Ukrainian army. The Battle of, I'm going to butcher this, but Deboltseve or something of this nature in northern Donetsk, near the Donetsk-Lugansk border. Basically, a couple thousand Ukrainian soldiers got surrounded by the Russians in early 2015, late 2014, early 2015. Vladimir Putin has talked about this battle, and he said that the biggest mistake he made was not terminating the Ukrainian army at that point in time. He said, we could have done it. We had them. All we had to do is just finish the job, kill them all, and that would have been the end of the Ukrainian army, and that would have been the end of the problem of Donetsk and Lugansk. It would have solved itself. But France and Germany intervened. Hollande, the president of France, Merkel, the chancellor of Germany, came in and begged Putin not to allow this slaughter to take place. And so that thus was born Minsk II. And Putin says he regrets this because the West clearly wasn't negotiating good faith. As Merkel and Hollande admit today, that was a sham. They were just buying time to rebuild the Ukrainian army to get the in position to finish the job on Ukrainian terms. But Syrskyi was the commander there, and he got a reputation for being very aggressive and getting the Ukrainian armies, butt in a sling. He was too aggressive. Syrskyi was the ground commander for the defense of Kiev. I'm not going to denigrate him. He, clearly the Russians didn't take Kiev. I don't think Russians were trying to take Kiev. Russia was doing a political maneuver trying to get Ukraine to the negotiation table. So Syrskyi's accomplishments in Kiev, have to be taken with a grain of salt. Russia wasn't pushed back from Kiev. Russia voluntarily withdrew from Kiev as part of the terms of the discussion. Putin mentioned this in the interview. Syrskyi also is in command of the Kharkov offensive in the summer and fall of 2022, after the Ukrainian army had been rebuilt with $48 billion of U.S. lend-lease money, equipment, European equipment. And the Russian army had, again, withdrawn from large swaths of territory, and over 50% of their forces in the Kharkov region had likewise withdrawn to Russia for refitting. So the Ukrainians attacked. Maybe the Russians should have been better prepared, but Syrskyi was able to push the Russians out of Kharkov to their current defensive positions. But in doing so, he lost a lot of men. That 60,000 man army that NATO had built up was eviscerated, and they had to build the army up again. And then Syrskyi engaged in Bakhmut. Many people were saying, "Hey, just give the Russians Bakhmut, pull back to the high ground, and dig in and save these lives. We need these lives for the summer counteroffensive." The summer counteroffensive wasn't supposed to be 90,000, supposed to be at 160,000 troops, but 70,000 of them got butchered in Bakhmut by Syrskyi, both the defense of Bakhmut and then once Bakhmut fell, the continuous attacks to try and recapture it that cost tens of thousands of Ukrainian lives. Syrskyi is responsible for that, and Syrskyi, of course, was the ground forces commander for the failed counteroffensive. The name Butcher comes because he's very aggressive, and he doesn't shy away from throwing away life. Zelensky liked Syrskyi. You see, one of the problems that Zelensky had with Zaluzhny was that in December of last year, Zaluzhny gave an interview with The Economist, I believe, where he said, "Look, we've reached a stalemate." And Zelensky's going, "You can't use that word. It doesn't matter what reality is. My job is to go out and get nations to give us equipment, and they're only going to give us equipment if they think that by doing so, we can fulfill their fantasy of strategically defeating Russia, which requires us to be aggressive on the battlefield to inflict harm on Russia, so Russia suffers losses so that there can be a political collapse of the Putin government. We need to be aggressive, aggressive, aggressive." And Zelensky's going, "We can't. We don't have anything left. We've thrown it all away. We're done. We have to go. It's a stalemate, and we need to go over on the defensive." And so, Zelensky also viewed Zaluzhny as a political threat. Zaluzhny was saying, "Hey, maybe I could do a better job." There's some leaked conversations where Zaluzhny allegedly says some things about Zelensky that aren't very flattering, but he clearly has a low opinion of the Ukrainian president. And the rumor was that he believed he could do a better job. If there was going to be an election that there should have been in March, Zaluzhny might have beat Zelensky at the polls. So Zelensky's had his, the crosshairs on Zaluzhny for some time to get rid of him. And finally, he decided it was time to pull the trigger. Zaluzhny was no longer the general who was able to fulfill the vision set forth by Zelensky. This created a crisis because when he first tried to fire Zaluzhny said no. Now, in civil military relations in a democracy, when the civilian leadership tells the military, "You're done, step aside," the only answer is, "Sir, yes, sir." We've seen this in American history. General McClellan thought he could fight the war better than Abraham Lincoln. But when Lincoln fired him, McClellan said, "Yes, sir," and he stood away. Douglas MacArthur thought he was a hell of a lot smarter than Harry Truman during the Korean War, wanted to have nuclear war against China. And Truman said, "Nope, you're fired." And MacArthur stepped aside. So now Zelensky has his vision of the war. Clearly, Zaluzhny doesn't agree with it. And Zelensky said, "You're fired." And Zaluzhny said, "No." Not only did he say no, then he went and brought in one of these senior Azov types, right sector guy, gave him a medal and took a picture in his office. Stepan Bandera's photograph behind him and the right sector flag. And the clear signal was, "Hey, these are the guys that I hang out with. And if you want to fire me, you're going to have to deal with these guys." And so there's a crisis. Victoria Nuland had to fly in and do a lot of work behind the scenes.
Give them some cookies, maybe. Yeah.
Hand out some cookies and pay. So, and at the end of the day, Zaluzhny stepped aside and Syrskyi came in. But what's interesting is, Syrskyi was saying, we're going to go on the immediate counteroffensive in Avdiivka to try and, push to stall the Russian attack. Well, today he says, "Nope, we've gone over on the exact same strategy that Zaluzhny was saying that they needed to do. Syrskyi's now doing it because reality is reality. But the difference is, I think when Victoria Nuland engaged, I think there was a coming to minds between Zelensky and the Americans now about the direction this war is taking. I think even the Americans are telling Zelensky, hey, stop with the fantasy of achieving a battlefield victory. You can't. We got nothing left to give you. Hey, so let me tell you something, Zelensky. That money ain't coming out of Congress anytime soon. All right. I mean, even if if Mike Johnson said no, it's dead on arrival, the Democrats are saying, well, we're going to try a parliamentarian, maneuver. It takes 30 days to get to that point. In 30 days, Ukraine is going to lose 50 to 60,000 more men. They don't have anybody else coming in. Syrskyi is doing what Zelensky was saying he wanted to do, but now Zelensky supports it because Zelensky understands that he can't allow fantasy to govern his actions, that the reality of the battlefield has to match the political reality that he has to get his allies to accept the fact that the best thing Ukraine can hope for right now is a stalemate, the stalemate that Zelensky was articulating back in December. But the problem is this isn't a stalemate. It's a rout. This is the collapse of the Ukrainian military, and there's nothing anybody can do to change it, which now brings us back to the earlier story that you had about Reuters. The Reuters article isn't about anything that Putin did. The Reuters article is about the panic within the West about how do we find an off-ramp. And they're putting ideas out there that are fantasy, but that what it's doing is it's creating the notion of a negotiated settlement. It's saying that this war won't end with Ukraine regaining its 1991 territories, pushing Russia out of Crimea. This war will end only through a negotiated settlement, and probably one that gives Russia all the territories that it currently possesses, and that the best bet Ukraine can have is to hope that by suing for peace early on, they get to retain the four that Vladimir Putin has indicated are part of the new Russia concept.
Yeah. And there's just, it's so interesting too, as you mentioned, Reuters again, and the reports of Putin reaching out. It's almost as if there's this broad recognition now, and especially in the United States as a political class, that this conflict isn't going the way that they imagined it would go. Or maybe I've thrown around the idea that maybe they didn't imagine it to go anywhere, any certain direction. There was hopes, maybe there were aspirations. However, there might have been an understanding among some in the blob of the foreign policy establishment that it's not so easy to take down Russia. And that then gets me thinking, well, okay, well, if you say Putin wants a peace deal, then one day, sometime in the near future, you say, we agreed. You can try to frame it as, oh, this was Putin's idea. Putin came to us. We didn't come to him. We were strong this whole time. And look, Ukraine did better than we imagined, because that's another narrative out there now. Ukraine has done better than we could have ever thought. Look at what they've been able to do. They've been able to hold the line. They've been able to push Russian forces back. Look at how strong Russia is compared to Ukraine, how big it is compared to Ukraine, and yet Ukraine stood up to Russia. That's another big narrative. So, on the other hand, though, you also have, various Western media publications, I believe Business Insider, the latest, saying things are really bad for Ukraine, and there really is no ceasefire or peace deal or anything in sight. So, Scott, could you just delineate a little bit what actually is happening right now on the battlefield? I know Avdiivka is really where everyone's eyes are, but at the same time, I know that there's a broader situation that this all points to.
Look, the way this war was, the positional war, one of the things that made it difficult is the weaponry that both sides have, the precision artillery, the drones, etc., make it difficult to mass your forces. And so the battlefield is defined by a series of small unit engagements, fighting for tree lines, fighting for a height, fighting for a corner of a village, and you amass the force necessary with the supporting arms to take that piece of land. And then what happened immediately is the other side counterattacks, and if they counterattack with sufficient support, they push you back. And so you were basically having this seesawing operation taking place. And no movement on the battlefield. What Russia was doing was creating the conditions there where they were killing more Ukrainians than the Ukrainians were killing Russians, but still the battlefield didn't move very much because Ukraine had sufficient manpower. Again, I just want to point out that, according to Zelensky, Ukraine has about 880,000 men under arms. Now, he made that statement about a month ago, and given the casualty rate, say 40, 50,000, I'd say that they have 830,000 men under arms today. And next month, they'll have 780,000 men under arms. And then the next month, they'll have, 720,000 men under arms. Because they're not getting any more manpower. They're losing stuff. And now you realize, well, that's a large number of men. They've got to man a huge frontage, and they've got to protect against a potential incursion from Belarus, and they have to screen off, the Transnistria region. And suddenly that's not a lot of men anymore. And the more casualties you suffer, the thinner your lines get, and you don't have the forces necessary to do these counterattacks. So what's happening right now, and it's happening right now as we speak, Russia's continuing the same intensity. They're taking this tree line, they're taking this city block, they're taking this height, as they did in the past. But this time the Ukrainians aren't counterattacking because they can't. So Russia now holds this land. And then the next day, they take another tree line, they take another city block, they take another height. Every day, 500 meters, 1.5 kilometers. It's not huge. These aren't 20-kilometer thrusts. These are just little chunks. But the Ukrainians can't counterattack. They can't hold. And the thing about that positional warfare is because the defenses are done in depth, as you penetrate a defensive line, you get stopped and then you get pushed back to your line. So the front never changed. Russia's now breaking through the Ukrainian defenses, and there's no coherent defense behind. And so the Russian, instead of going tree line, the reason why you go tree line is that you have defenses able to, provide, supporting fire, crossfires, et cetera. So you can't bite off too much or else you're going to get hit on flanking fires. There's no more artillery. The drones don't fly for the Ukrainians well anymore because Russia has been killing the drone operators, and Russia's just biting off these big chunks. Adviivka is falling because Russia is able to make big incursions into the city, and there's nobody to counterattack. There's no counterattacking force. The defenders there are dying. You can't even rotate them out. They've run out of ammunition. They're hungry. They're wounded. And nobody's relieving them. This is the reality of the battlefield throughout the front. It's happening everywhere. I would ask people to go back and study World War II battle. It's called the Collapse of Army Group Center. Took place in the summer of 1944. German Army Group Center, huge group of forces defending the central front on the Eastern Front, and the Russians launched a counterattack or launched an attack. And the Germans, of course, very effective defenders, are starting to defend, but they didn't have the troops to counterattack, to push back. And eventually the Russians broke them down and the front just collapsed. And that's what we're getting to right now. And you hear the panic in everybody's voice because everybody sees it in the West. They're going, holy cow, the Ukrainians are becoming so thin that the Russians are going to come through and there's going to be nothing left to stop them. And at that point in time, Russia pushes up the Dnieper River. Remember Vladimir Putin's speech about history. The left bank is Russia, and that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, and many have made predictions that 2025, I believe there's a goal on the Russian side that 2025, this will have been resolved in some form or another. Do you feel like that's the case? Yeah, I'm wondering your thoughts about that, because on the one hand, you have Russia obviously in this commanding position on the battlefield and also in all sorts of other areas that we have covered here, economically, politically, in terms of its legitimacy. All of this, even its narrative now around Ukraine is widespread, agreed with, or at least validated by most of the world. But at the same time, you still have the United States, you still have NATO, while they have cooled on maybe the official position on Ukraine that they began with and ran with. At the same time, they're not ones to retreat from conflicts unless they're literally running out, like in Afghanistan, where they're literally having to run out with the tails between their legs because they're being chased.
But NATO's never been confronted by a force that they've done there. Look, again, I don't speak for the Russian government. I'm not, despite what people might say, I'm not part of the Russian government. But I have spoken to senior leaders, military and civilian alike, and basically the feeling is that something very major. I mean, that the war will enter a completely new phase sometime in May of this year. And I think that what they're talking about is the collapse. Um, and that between May and September, the Russians will make very huge advances, seizing Odessa, Mykolaiv, Dnipropetrovsk, Kharkov, and that by September, October, this thing's over. Now, what the 2025 figure comes into where Russia is budgeted. Because Russia, I think, expects that the demilitarization will be accomplished by September of this year. But then you have the issue of denazification, the political aspect of it. And so you have to continue to fund. Plus, Russia has to take into account NATO's overreaction. Not that NATO will get involved, but I can guarantee that with this collapse comes NATO panicking and insisting that they get 300,000 troops up on the Polish border, and that can't happen in a vacuum. So Russia has budgeted for continued military buildup to counter that. But at some point in time, the defeat of Ukraine will be absolute, and the West will have to learn to live with this defeat, with this outcome. It will be sort of the European version of Afghanistan, where at the end of the day, there's nothing they can do. There's literally nothing they can do to change this outcome. Ukraine is being defeated. Ukraine is being destroyed. The NATO gambit has failed. And now NATO will have to fall back and figure out what they're going to do about it. And this is where, Russian diplomacy comes into mind, because right now NATO's talking about, Russia talking moving on to Poland, threatening the Baltics. Russia's not going to do any of that. I mean, Russia's not going to sit there and pretend that the Baltics aren't being idiots. They're not going to sit there and pretend that Finland isn't being suicidal and all that, but they're not going to attack Finland. They're not going to attack the Baltics. They're not going to attack Poland. They're not going to attack Romania. What Russia wants to do is bring stability to Europe along the lines of what they proposed back in December of 2021. You remember those two draft treaties, one to NATO, one to the United States, about a new European security framework? Well, you're starting to hear a lot of people in Europe saying, hey, that's not a bad discussion to have with the Russians right now. And I think, for instance, Germany, you've got the inherently contradictory postures of, Admiral Bauer, the head of the military commission or whatever he is, German, talking about, we have to prepare for war with Russia, the imminence of war with Russia. Within 20 years, he talks about it. Within 20 years, dude, you're not going to be alive in 20 years. You don't know what's going to happen in 20 years. It shows you the stupidity of that. But the point is, let's say he said within 2 years. How is Germany going to do that? They're deindustrializing as we speak. Their industries are collapsing. They're fleeing the country. Their economy is shrinking. And so in all of this, and it's bringing about, social reaction. The German farmers are in a near revolutionary state right now to bring down the German government. And in this, you suddenly have this lone admiral who's gone insane, talking about war. We have to rebuild. We have to build, a new German army. With patriotic Germans. There are no patriotic Germans, dude. They don't care. They don't share your fantasy. Germans aren't running around with the German flag on their shoulder anymore. They're not signing up to join your army or your navy or your air force. So now he's talking about, the German people have to prepare for war. You need water and food and radios and batteries and all. And the German people are going, dude, we just want an economy that works, And so I think you're going to see Europe, all of Europe, undergo this transition where the political and economic elite that got them into this position where their economies are collectively collapsing are going to be pushed out of the way, and a new political and economic elite is going to emerge. And I think you're going to see sanity prevail. I mean, what's Germany's quickest route to the restoration of their economy? Cheap Russian gas. Boom. And I think that's the direction you're heading. So I think Russia's going to exploit that. I do believe that there's maneuver room in the next 5 to 10 years for Russia and Europe to get their act together to, you know, denuclearize. I mean, get those American bombs out of Europe. You know, don't let bombs go into Poland. Try and stop the bombs going into England. Russia can withdraw their nuclear weapons from Belarus. You know, maybe a new conventional forces in Europe thing where they start bringing down, because it's to NATO's advantage. Why spend $300 billion to build up a military that will never be able to stand toe to toe with the Russians, meaning, you know, attacking Russia? Russia's never going to attack NATO. But so I think sanity will prevail. And I think that's the posture that Russia's taking. But what Russia can't do is a half measure. What I mean is everything I just talked about, sanity prevailing, is predicated upon a decisive Russian victory. Europe has to be presented with a reality, a non-negotiable reality. What you see with all of these wishful thinking musings in the media is, for instance, a lot of people are saying we want a stalemate. Well, what's a stalemate? That creates a 38th parallel situation, you know, like the Korean conflict, you know, a frozen conflict, which means that Ukraine, as it currently exists, still exists. This entity called Ukraine, which is a cancer to Russia, still exists. That NATO will flow in weapons by freezing the conflict. Some in NATO believe at that point in time, NATO troops can come into Ukraine and create a de facto reality of a NATO, you know, of Ukraine being a NATO member with Article 5 protections of this nature. Russia will never allow that. Russia will never allow a frozen conflict, a 38th parallel. This is fantasy. Russia has to solve the Ukrainian problem once and for all. And that means literally the destruction of the modern Ukrainian state as it's currently configured. The absolute elimination of Banderist ideology, this ultranationalism that exists, Ukrainian ultranationalism, has to be purged. It can't be allowed to exist inside Ukraine. It really can't. And Russia has to convince the West to not allow it to exist in diaspora. That's going to be a tough sell in the United States and Canada, but I do think you can get other nations to agree that Banderist ideology should go to the way of, you know, Hitler's Nazi ideology, meaning it should be widely recognized as being evil in nature, destructive to European values, and shouldn't be allowed to exist on European soil. But this can only happen if Russia wins the war decisively, and Russia's on the path of accomplishing this. I mean, that literally, this is the inevitable outcome, unless Putin suddenly has a stroke and decides to negotiate away. That's why Putin will never negotiate. That's why the Russians will never negotiate, not the way the West or Zelensky wants, because Russia knows it has to have a decisive victory. Russia knows the following, that Crimea will never be secure as long as the Ukrainians control Odessa. And you can thank Great Britain for this. You can thank the British who went in and said it would be very clever for us to build these underwater drones to give the Ukrainians Storm Shadow missiles and to use Odessa as a launching pad to attack the Crimean Peninsula, to attack Feodosia, to attack Sevastopol. Yeah, you got some you got some PR moments. You know, oh, boom, you blew up the bridge. Oh, boom, you blew up a boat. Oh, boom. Well, what you did, England, is you cost Ukraine Odessa and the Black Sea coast. You ensured that the future Ukraine will be nothing but an agricultural rump state, landlocked, because you decided to score stupid tactical points without thinking about the larger strategic picture. So England has cost Ukraine Odessa, and if Russia's taken Odessa, it's taken Mykolaiv. End of story. You can't have Odessa without Mykolaiv. And if you're taking Mykolaiv, you have to take the rest of the left bank of the Dnieper, Dnepropetrovsk, and Kharkov. It's over. That's what's going to happen. There's nothing going to change that. And that's the reality the West is going to have to learn to deal with.